Hi guys, okay. Today's just a little taste of a upcoming video. I just got back from the Pathfinder gathering and it was held in Ohio, and just down the street, just down the road was this small town. And so Trinity Sainer and I were working together, and she wanted pizza and had found out there was a pizza place in that little bitty town. And so we had loaded up and went down there, and literally 2 doors down from the pizza place was a surplus place. Army surplus. So she says, hey, you want to check it out while we're waiting on the pizza? Sure. So we go in there and we're looking around, and in the case he had a Rogers and Spencer made by Euro Arms in the 1980s. In very good shape. The giveaway to me that this is actually a Civil War reenactor and probably a cavalry officer's is when you look at the butt of it, it's all dinged up. The rest of the gun is not. That means it was right in a holster and his saber was banging against it. Now I will do a detail on this in the future for my percussion revolver channel. I'll do a complete on the Rogers and Spencer. And I've wanted one of these since the 70s. When I first saw Euro Arms bring them out in the 80s, I wanted one. But I could never get the money up to get one. And I have read about them. I've seen write-ups about them. But nowhere in all of those write-ups or videos did they ever mention the powder capacity of this thing. So I get it home, and I'm going to take it out and do a shoot with it, just to give it a test fire. I've already made sure it's all functioning, right? And so I was going to bring it out. And so the way that I start out is I was going to shoot a Johnson & Dow bullet in it to begin with. Because I made sure everything was in functioning. I broke it completely down, clean, to make sure there's any grease in it or whatever. All parts were free moving and properly lubricated. And then I stepped out to measure the chamber capacity. And I put down a piece of aluminum foil. And I take my powder measure, and I find out what the total capacity of it is. Now an 1860 Army and a 58 Remington is 40 grains. Actually, it's 50 grains fills it to the top. There's no room for a ball. So if you take out the 10 grains for the ball, the absolute maximum you could probably get into a Remington or into an 1860 Army is somewhere around 38, 39 grains. And then it just, I mean, you're ramming so hard you're bending the ball. So that's what I'm figuring. So I dumped 40 grains in, and it was way on down the hole. So I double checked, made sure that my powder was completely pouring out of the powder measure, and etc. And I poured powder in again. None of y'all, Mike Bellevue and all of you, none of you told me this thing was a Dragoon, that it could put 50 grains and then a ball behind it, or 40 grains and a Johnson & Dow in front of it. Nobody in all my years of reading had ever said this thing had a Dragoon cylinder on it, because as you know, the Walker started out with 60 grain and then they reduced it down to a 50 grain. This will hold a 50 grain charge plus the ball. Don't believe me? I'll show you. It's loaded with 50 grains right now behind every ball. We're going to shoot that target down there. Seven yards. No problem. No binding. A little bit of black on my thumb in my hand, and not a cap left. This open dish out, the caps just literally blow out of it. Next time you rotate, they just fall off. No problem. Let's go take a look and see what I did. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Only loaded 5. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, this thing's got a trigger pull of 20 pounds. If they've got one problem with it, it's the way that they created the trigger. And what that means is, the hammer notch on the full cock is undercut so that your sear of your trigger locks up in. That's how we got a safe, half cock. The full cock notch should be a flat blunt notch that it sits to, so all it's got to do is lift off. They've undercut it. So the actual trigger sear sits, and you got to lift the hammer up. You watch the hammer come back just to grunt when I pull the trigger. I will correct that. But right now she's got a trigger pull like 20 pounds. This gun has not been shot hardly any. When I looked at it in depth, it was obvious this gun has been carried a whole lot and not been shot a whole lot. So I'm betting some sort of reenactor. However, nobody in all my reading has ever mentioned that thing had a capacity of 50 grains and a ball. That was a 4.54 round ball underneath 50 grains, and it loaded just as easily as it done with like 30 grains. I poured, and I will show you that in just a second. I poured a measured 50 grains in it. I took my knuckle and just tapped it to settle it, and it dropped down about 10 grains down, enough to put a ball in it, and I rammed it. That was it. 50 grain charge. Let me show you. Okay, just in case I forgot to mention, I am out at the shooting range today doing this test, so we're on a shooting range. Here's my powder measure. Hopefully you can focus. That says 50 grains right there. So I'm going to fill up my powder measure just like that. Put the gun on the half cock. Select a chamber, pour the powder into it, tap it, make sure it all comes out, pour in. Yes, it's fully in there. Now, that's where it sits. Now watch what happens when I tap it. See it drop way down there? Now taking a 4.54 home cast round ball onto that, we're going to put the sprue facing downhill. Just like that. We're going to rotate it under, and we're going to ram it. How easy was that, guys? Let me circle it back around here. There it is, and it's well below flush. It's like 5 grains below flush. With a 50 grain charge. That's a Dragoon. No one ever said in all my years that this thing held up to a 50 grain charge. Now, of course, that goes without saying, that's a max load. And when we talk about it in depth later on, we'll go into why. Why the Dragoons hung on. Now, they were, with the Walkers and the Dragoons, they were a military pistol. And what we think of as the cavalry was a little bit later. Early on was the Dragoons, and they would be sort of infantry that fought on horseback. Dragoons predominantly fought with pistols. However, there was mounted rifles, and mounted rifles typically would use horses to fast get from A to B, and they would dismount and then fight like infantry. Okay? Dragoons fought usually from horseback and would come through as a lightning ray, just like the old days of knights and things where a cavalry would rush in, slash in through the infantry unit using the horses and swords to disrupt columns and then run out. They were a hit and run tactic. Well, one of the reasons they wanted that 50 grain charge is everything in the armies was horses in those days. So you've got artillery, you've got whatever, a unit on the road moving, and I would slash in with my cavalry detachment, and we'd come running through the middle of your column going boom, 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 boom. With that kind of power, it would penetrate one soldier and go into 2 or 3 more possibly. Or I could easily kill a horse or the mule pulling your wagon, because if it takes a team of 4 mules and horses to pull your cannon, and I drop all 4 of them, you ain't taking that cannon very far. I've limited your ability. And so that was the horsepower. That's the reason we needed it. That line of dragoon power came downhill, and in the 1860 Army, which had a maximum load of, really ramming it in there, 40 grains like I spoke of. Most of the dragoons had been dropped back down in power to 35 or 40 grains because they did not need that. Yes, they could load a 50 grain load, but usually they were actually loading a 35 to 40 grain load to save powder and do the same job up close. You only loaded it that heavy when you needed that kind of penetration. So, this Rogers and Spencer can handle a 50 grain, well, can load a 50 grain, which means it should load a 35 or 40 grain, no problem. My only concern is how deep can it go. See, since it's got such a large capacity, if I go to try to put a 25 grain charge in there, that's half the bore. I got to make sure my rammer can push it down that deep and not have an air load, because it would stop the ball before it really got to the powder. I think I'm standing on ants. So, this is just a little taste, guys, of my new toy I picked up. Give me a little bit of time to work on sighting it in and etc., and we'll talk about it. But to all you guys that's wrote about and talked about the Rogers and Spencer, shame on you for never pointing out it's a Dragoon. It'll handle a Dragoon load. That's pretty impressive. Till next time, guys, I'm Blackie wishing you safe journeys. Have a great day, guys.